The command line. It is a utility that we look at and sometimes get a little intimidated. Now, it's not every day we need to make use of the Windows command line, but, well, it's good to know what it is, how it works, and, why there is a need for it. And that is exactly what we're gonna explore in this 3-part mini-series. You're watching the first episode on the command line on 0612 TV. This is 0612 TV.
Welcome aboard.
So alright, let us jump right in by looking at the history of the command line. When and why was it significant, and what part did it play in the past? You see, we interact with modern operating systems such as Windows or Linux via a graphics user interface. This means that you are able to use your mouse to click on and interact with various items on screen. This makes operation extremely intuitive. But if we were to pop back 20 or so years, you realize that GUIs aren't that well adopted. Partially the reason for that is that there aren't enough resources to actually support a full-blown GUI, which means that what we are left with is a very simple, just text kind of way to interact with a computer. So in fact, the earliest computers didn't even have, a Windows or mouse-based interface. Essentially, you boot up your computer and all you see is this. MS-DOS, that's all it has to offer. All interaction that you carry out with the computer happens from that command line. In those days, you don't click on anything, you don't use the mouse for anything. In fact, you don't even have a mouse on a computer, unless, there are some graphic things going on. So okay, that is the historical application of a command line interface. What is its significance today then? While it's true that GUI applications have greatly overtaken the use of command line programs, some programs are still written for command line. The core functionality of some programs out there don't actually require a GUI. A GUI would be a bonus, but it is not mandatory for the use of the program. What this means is in some cases, certain programs don't even have GUIs. And this means that, especially if you're tinkering with a lot of open source stuff, you realize that not everything has a front end. Things like FFmpeg, which is arguably the best video conversion tool out there, does not actually have a front end. Sure, you can download a GUI front end, but what that is doing essentially is you can drag and drop everything into the window, but once you click on the convert button, all the work it does essentially is in a hidden command line window. So it's good to know how to use the command line. It's not something to be afraid of. In fact, a lot of programs are built on top of this. So without further ado, let us jump right in. Let us take a look at the actual command line interface. Disclaimer, in this episode, we're only going to be looking at the Windows command prompt. Obviously, the alternatives do exist, and in fact, we will actually look at the Unix version of the command line in episode 3. However, right now, we're going to focus on the Windows command line. If you're on Windows Vista or Windows 7, you can access the command line by pressing Start, typing CMD, and hitting Enter. If you're on Windows XP or earlier, go to Start, Run, and type CMD. This is the command prompt window. There is nothing in it. And yes, this is how things worked in the past. Essentially, all you had was a blinking cursor. So the idea is this. To interact with the command line, you type in a command. You hit enter, the computer processes the command and throws out the output at you. And essentially that's all there is. The same window acts as both input and output. You can see whatever you type and you can see whatever is returned from whatever commands you decide to run. And just to show you a very simple example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type dir, which stands for directory, and it lists everything in a particular folder. When I hit enter, well, that's the result of my command. All the contents of the folder just thrown out on screen. Once you get familiar with the concept, let us begin by actually interacting with the command line. Now, the first and most important command that you will probably be interested in is the help command. Yes, if you type help, you will be able to see all the possible commands that you can use, as well as some descriptive text to actually teach you how each command works. You also realize that essentially what you're doing is you are browsing a file and folder structure. Of course, back then they didn't call it folders, they call it directories, which is why if you want to see the contents of the directory you are in, you type dir, which stands for directory. So on screen, you will see all the files and folders contained within that particular directory. To then browse, let's say you want to go to another directory, all you have to do is type cd space and the name of the directory you want to go to. So let's wipe the slate clean and let's try again. We are now sitting in a folder that I specifically designed for this tutorial. So I'm gonna go ahead and type dir. A full directory listing appears on screen. Let's say now I want to navigate to the folder called test. All I have to do is type cd space test. When I hit enter, notice that the prompt now says I'm in a different folder. Essentially, I've just switched directories. If I were to type dir again, I'll be able to see the contents of the new directory. Then of course the next question is, how do I backtrack? Because obviously you can go deeper, but you also want to be able to come back out. Now take a close look at the directory listing here. I'm going to actually open this folder in a normal Windows Explorer window, and you'll notice that two of the folders listed in the command line is missing from the Windows Explorer representation. In fact, there is a folder called dot and a folder called dot. Now this is just how command lines work, but the dot folder refers to itself. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but well, some programs actually need this to refer to the folder that the program itself is sitting in. That doesn't concern us very much. We won't be taking too close of a look at that, so just understand that the dot folder just refers to the same folder. What's more interesting is the dot folder. You see, if you cd space dot, what this means is you want to backtrack. So the directory dot actually refers to the parent directory of whatever directory you're looking at. This means of course that if we want to backtrack, we simply go cd dot and so on and so forth until you get back however far you want. So really, this isn't very different from your Windows operating system, because look at it this way. Every command you call is actually a program. For example, when you call the command help, essentially what it's doing is there is a file somewhere in the system called help.exe. It executes that program and gives you whatever output it's supposed to produce. So really, you can just think of every command as calling a program. In fact, right now, if I were to actually browse over to my System32 folder, I can simply type notepad and take a look at that. I've actually launched notepad from the command line. Also note that the executable file notepad is technically called notepad.exe, but to launch this, I don't actually need to type the exe part of the name. So that's one thing to note. Now, I'm about done for this episode because we're only looking at the basics here. However, I want to introduce you to one last thing before we go. This is a feature called command switches. Now, here's the deal. When you want to work a program, chances are there are some settings that will slightly alter the way the program works, and depending on what situation you are in, you might want to use a different option, and this is exactly what command switches do. For example, now I'm in this folder, and if I type dir, well, there's a lot of stuff and it all kind of just scrolls past. I mean, sure, if you're using the command prompt on a modern computer, all you have to do is just scroll up, but what happens if you were back in those days where there wasn't a mouse and scrolling up wasn't possible? What you can do is you can type dir space /p. The P essentially just means pause. The slash tells it this is an option, or to be exact, a command switch, which will slightly modify the way the program works. In fact, when you call directory /pause, what's going to happen is you're going to get one screen full of text, and when you're done looking at that, press space, you get a next screen full, and so on, depending on how many pages of text there are. And that's it. That's all I have to cover with you today. Perhaps you can open command prompt and just, pop around the folders. Technically, you can wreak pretty bad havoc if you actually, mess around with command prompt without understanding what you're doing. So be careful. Don't run any command that you are not sure what it does. But in fact, things are actually kept pretty safe on modern Windows computers, because if a command window doesn't have administrative access, chances are the damage you can do will be quite limited. So that's all there is for this episode. If you have any comments, queries or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Don't forget to follow the official Twitter for this channel at twitter.com/0612tv. As always, I appreciate every like, favorite and subscription you give me. 2 more episodes to go, but until next time, you're watching 0612TV.